of what you need to know, but let me ask you this. How many of you in here have ever had to plan a funeral for somebody close to you? How many people in here have their arrangements already made ahead of time? Very good. Wow. That's impressive. Of the people who had to make arrangements ahead of time, or not ahead of time, but of you that had to make arrangements for someone close to you, what did you find was the hardest part you had to do? The hardest thing was following the wishes. Okay. How many in here would choose traditional burial? How many would choose cremation?
Thinking about it.
Okay. So with that, I kind of know where to go. So what I want you all to do for me, if you will, now, let me make notes of the topics and or the questions you want to make sure I cover. Yes, ma'am. Cost of cremation. Okay. Let me talk to you about the laws have changed. Everything that we've been told and everything that we've done from October of 2017 back has all changed. Meaning that it used to be, and it still is if you don't do what I'm going to explain to you that the new law is, but here's where people get really caught in a bind. Is they'll have a loved one pass away, they'll come in and sit down with me, and there'll be 2 or 3 or 4 children, and inevitably one of them says, I'm the power of attorney. So what I say goes. Guess what? Your power of attorney ceases at death. It's no longer a legal document. So you have as much say so as the other 4. So then they come right back and say, I'm the executor of the will. Okay, that's great, but you haven't been appointed yet. It'll take you a week to 10 days to 2 weeks to get appointed executor, and usually people don't put their funeral wishes in their will. The will is about taking care of the assets, not the body. So now we have a situation to where we have disagreements amongst family members, and nobody's in charge. So somebody has to make a decision as to how this is going to be planned out. Henceforth, the change of the law. Cremation County drove this change, not so much the funerals, but Cremation County drove the change because if you go ahead and do a funeral, and then a family member shows up 2 weeks later and says, I don't want it done that way, you can change it. You can disinter it, you can change the whole thing. You can't change cremation. Once that's done, it's done. So they have come out now, the law used to say that if you choose cremation, the next of kin has to sign. If that's 4 children, it takes all 4. So there are situations to where I'm sitting with 3 children. One of them's been estranged for 20 years, don't know where they are, don't know how to get a hold of them. And this may not relate to anybody in here, but the one person stops the show. The only way to have that person cremated before 2017 was to go to court. So we ended up in court, probably 1 out of every 5 families that chose cremation. That's kind of what drove the change I'm going to explain to you. Now they have, yes sir, just in Kentucky. There's other states, and I don't know which ones they are, but I'm just quoting you Kentucky law. Now they've come out with what's called a funeral planning declaration. This is a legal document that if you sign it, you put your wishes on it, no matter what they are. It asks you on this funeral planning declaration, and you can go online and print one off. You can go to the funeral home of your choice and sit down, and we'll help you fill it out. You can choose burial. You can choose cremation. You can choose what funeral home you want. You can choose what kind of service you want. You can make all these choices. Once you sign it, it cannot be overturned. Your spouse can't come in and say, I'm not cremating him. You would be surprised how many people I sat with, husband and wife, that are making their arrangements ahead of time, and one of them will say, if I die first, I want to be cremated. If you die first, I'm not going to cremate you, because I don't want you cremated. So now we got a husband and wife that doesn't want to cremate the other one. So this funeral planning declaration stops all this court, stops all this children, stops everything so your wishes can be followed. This is very, very important. Even if you don't do anything else, you can say, I prefer burial, I prefer cremation, and this is the person to make my final wishes, and you don't have to pick anything out. You can leave it to whoever your designee is. It's that simple, if you don't want to go through the whole process. Okay? That's what has really changed in October 2017 and what's really, really important. Questions on that part? Yes, sir. No, sir. Yes, sir. Yes.
Priority of next of kin.
There is a pecking order, excuse the expression. The state has said, here's the order it goes in. And the order is funeral planning declaration first. There's an old form called the CR3 that was grandfathered in. If you signed the old funeral pre-planning form, they'll grandfather that one in, so that's second. Next is a spouse. Then it goes to children. Then it goes to grandchildren. Then it goes to siblings. And then it goes to whatever the next aunts, uncles, nieces, whoever falls in. And then it says at the bottom now, a person willing to act as such if there are none of those people. So if you have a person, happen to be a POA, the POA is no good, but they are willing to step up and make the arrangements, then that's legal now. Correct. That question was, if I have remarried, do my biological children supersede my second spouse? The answer is no. It's the spouse. Doesn't matter what number. If you will, the spouse is still in control. In fact, there's a lawsuit over that one right now. Somebody tried to challenge that, but it's not going to go anywhere. Questions? Yes, sir.
Can you please talk about absolute assignments when it comes to being like under Medicaid?
That's a great subject. I'm going to go there as a whole segment. Okay, thank you for reminding me. How many people in here think that if you choose traditional burial, you have to be embalmed? How many people think embalming is state law? Most people do. Guess what? Embalming is not state law, never has been. Why do we embalm? Because we always have. Why do you think it's a state law? Because it's always been done. I mean, nobody's ever given you a choice. What the law says is the only reason you have to be embalmed is if you're going to have an open casket viewing in public. Choose any other kind of service, You don't have to be involved. I'll take a kick at my professional health funerals will tell you that. It's a line item you get charged for and you don't question it. So those are choices that you have.
If you're not involved, do you have like a family meeting, can they open it?
They can. Immediate family can view an uninvolved body, not the public. So you can have what we call just like a private family viewing with your close family and then have a closed casket presentation and funeral, just like we've always done. Okay? And embalming is not necessary. Medicaid, Medicare spend downs is kind of what we refer to them. People, you just don't wake up on Saturday morning and say, honey, let's go down to the funeral home, make my arrangements. It just doesn't happen. I mean, we're all human, we're all procrastinators, and it's all normal. But here's what happens is, younger in life, you go, I don't need to make those arrangements because I have plenty of insurance to take care of whatever happens. And that's usually a true statement. As life goes on, you retire. When you retire, a lot of time, your benefits from work go down. A lot of times, your benefits from work, depending on your age, expire. What I didn't know is whole life expired sometimes. I've had 2 families in the last year that have brought me insurance policies that they lived to be too old and they were no good. I never heard of that. I'm going, how do you outlive your life insurance? But you can't. People are living so much longer, they thought they had X amount and they had nothing. And there is no refund. You paid all those premiums in for no return. The other thing I'd caution you about is TB insurance. You see all these ads on TV where if you're between 50 and 85 and you don't have no health questions and you can have this much insurance, it's all on the up and up. It's all true, but what they don't tell you is you have to live 3 years. And so families come in all the time with these insurance policies that are a year and a half old that aren't any good, but nobody ever told them that's in the fine print. So be really careful. If you get one of those, make sure you got to live 3 years for pay the death benefit. So you can get in a situation as we go on in life as to what I call an extended illness, or you end up needing to find people at Taylor Manor, and you need Medicaid to help you take care of those expenses. Then basically you have to be destitute on paper. So the government makes you get rid of all your assets. They'll ask you to cash in your life insurance. Don't do that. See me first, okay? What they don't tell you is you can assign the ownership of that policy and the beneficiary to the funeral of your choice, and they can't take it. If you do that, then the person who's insured has no rights to that policy, so therefore it has no cash value to that person, and they can't take it. A lot of people don't know that. Medicaid will tell you that. They'll just go ahead and cash the policy in, and it could be worth $10,000 if you die, but it's only worth $2,500 if you cash it out. Follow me? So they will also tell you, go to the funeral home, make your funeral arrangements, and pay for your funeral, because that's not an asset. So many people don't do that. They run through all their life savings. The government took their insurance, the government took their house, they took everything they had, they pass away, and there's no money to do anything with. And 5 years before that, they were perfectly set. Make sense?
Absolutely. Can I add on to that?
I wouldn't expect anything less.
With the Knights of Columbus, a couple of things that Dave just talked about is that in some instances, in some cases, that you see your whole life insurance expire, okay? There are companies out there that, yes, when you reach a certain age, a certain point, your insurance will expire to nothing. So you put in $25,000, $30,000 into this plan and walk away with nothing, okay? I will say, at the Knights of Columbus, is that our whole life guaranteed permanent insurance is good to 120. All right, good to 120. So if you live to 120, okay, not only will you get a thank you from the Knights of Columbus, but we will give you a check for what your policy is worth, okay? Is what it's worth. And yes, I have seen where policies have expired at age 83. I've seen where they've expired at age 78, and they're supposedly permanent whole life, which is, in my opinion, they unfortunately sold you the Brooklyn Bridge, okay? The second point, and the reason why I brought up the absolute assignment, is because every week we get phone calls coming in where we got to put mom or dad into the nursing home. As we're putting mom and dad into the nursing home, they're telling us that we have to spend down, that we have to get rid of everything they have, okay? So what I do is I'll inform them, if they have a nice life insurance policy, to get a hold of the funeral home. We can do an absolute assignment. Also, we can also do what we call a reduced paid up if need be. Reduced paid up is basically stating they'll take the policy as is, no more premium is needed, and we will assign it to the funeral home. Funeral home be the beneficiary, so that way the funeral is paid for, okay? Case in point, had a young man over in Louisville. He's taking care of his mom and dad. He quit working so he could take care of mom and dad. He could no longer take care of mom and dad anymore, so he had to put them in the nursing home. The nursing home said, you gotta sell the house, you gotta sell the cars, you gotta sell all their belongings. The only thing basically they can keep is the clothes on their back. Plus also they had two beautiful Knights of Columbus life insurance policies, each of them together, the benefit was over $50,000, okay? He had to cash them all in. And he did all this before he called us. All right? Because he asked me, he says, now what do I do for a funeral? I said, well, unfortunately, you're going to have to write a check because you've already got rid of all their policies. You didn't do an absolute assignment, so the government's got everything. And he's like, well, I don't even have a job. So my heart was breaking for this poor man, okay? Because he's taking care of his parents, and the government came in and took everything they had. So, when you're putting mom and dad in the nursing home, and they have life insurance that's permanent, term doesn't work. Term doesn't work because there's no cash value to term. Term is what it is. So, make sure, get a hold of us, get a hold of Dave, funeral home, make sure that we take that policy, we put it to good use, so that way you guys will have a funeral. Thank you, Dave. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Is there some tax loophole for assigning a life insurance policy to the funeral home?
Your question is there a tax loophole that is assigning the policy to the funeral home? No, sir.
I've been under, or had explained to me that if you assign a policy to the funeral home, you would not be charged, or the estate would not be charged with a taxable income.
Life insurance isn't taxable. Whether you sign it to the funeral home or whether you collect it, it doesn't go through the estate unless the beneficiary is the estate. Life insurance is always outside the estate, so it's never taxable unless it's paid to the estate. Then you're subject to estate taxes, but most people have it made out to an individual. So individual or funeral home, there's no tax ramifications. Which, back to Daryl's point, let me explain to you, because here is, I get these phone calls too, unfortunately, is I don't have any money, I don't have a job, the government took everything, so-and-so has died. Is there any agency that'll help me? Unfortunately, the answer is no, there's not. There is no federal agency that'll help you with funerals outside of being a veteran, and that's very small help toward the funeral. It's a big help toward the cemetery, a small help toward the funeral. There is no state agency. that'll help you with the funeral.
How much on the veterans do they pay? You said there was little. but
Little.
what do they pay?
Depends on, veterans, it depends on where you die. If you pass away outside a veterans hospital or a veterans nursing home, they'll pay $300 toward the funeral. If you die in the VA care, which seems backwards to me, because they're spending all this money to take care of you, or if you die in a VA nursing home, they'll pay $762 toward the funeral. Now, they will furnish you, for the veteran, a grave, a vault, opening, closing, the headstone for the veteran and their spouse at a national cemetery like Camp Nelson in Jessamine County. That's about 10 grand or more times 2. So they do that for every veteran that is honorably discharged. Back to the agencies that'll help you, it's county by county. So if you are a resident of Woodford County government does zero for you, nothing. If you're a resident of Franklin County, their policy is they will pay $1,000 toward funeral or cremation expenses, whatever's chosen, if you have no living relatives. So almost everybody doesn't qualify for the Franklin County program. Pass away in Fayette County, they'll write you a check for $500 to do whatever you want to with it. Jessamine County, it's $300, see? So there isn't a state agency that'll get you cremated or buried.
I'm gonna ask this question as a consumer from Joe from the pew, okay? If I'm Joe in the pew, I've never had a death in my family, how does one go about choosing a funeral home? What steps like that? Clark Legacy being one of the greatest in this area.
Thank you.
But how would one say, and usually one of my experiences now going back into clergy, Father, who do I call? Because oftentimes I know clergy do make recommendations. I try not to. I say they're all fine, make your choice. But I get caught to say, how do you shop for a funeral home? Any wisdom you can give on that? The general consumer, how do you shop for a funeral home?
You know what? In today's world now, look at Google. Look at the Google reviews. I'm telling you, they're on there. Good, bad, and indifferent. We'll talk about costs. I mean, that'll go right into it. How many of you would think that if you had someone pass away, the first thing you do is pick up the phone and start calling multiple funeral homes to see which one's the cheapest? Would anybody in here do that?
If you didn't have anything already set up.
Huh?
If you didn't have anything set
If
up.
you didn't have anything set up, would you do that?
All the men do that, the women are like, I don't know.
More and more people all the time are doing that.
That's not the
Believe-
tradition of the family. That funeral home's always been mine. That's always a quandary I find when they haven't had a death yet. And like, I don't know who. It's like, who's my mechanic? Who's my doctor? What's things like that. What is my funeral home?
And I understand that. I mean, my grandfather started the funeral home in Versailles in 1915. I enjoy that heritage there because it has been like that. It has been, grandmother always went to Dual Clark. Dad always went to Dual Clark, so I guess I'm going to Dual Clark. Well, guess what? No, you're not. Not anymore. That loyalty is gone for the most part. You know, I've used this funeral home and I've used this funeral home. People are changing because they want different options than what they've always been presented. They want relatively fair pricing. Does it pay to shop? I'll tell you it does. It's my business to know what other funeral homes charge. I won't use local funeral homes here, but I'll use Lexington. We have a location in Lexington, a location for sale, a location in Frankfurt. So in Lexington, if you call us and you ask for what we call basic cremation, which maybe it goes right to addressing part of your question, what's cremation cost, was her question early on. Then basic cremation means, some people call it direct, we call it basic, some people call it simple, they call it different names, but it's all the same thing. It means that we come to the place of death, pick you up, bring you back into our care. We have to sit down with your family, there's legal paperwork we do for you, we notify Social Security, we get the certified copies of the death certificate, newspaper placements, obituaries. Excuse the expression, but the state does require an encasement for somebody to be cremated in. That's included in the cost. And then for us, we're the only funeral home in central Kentucky now that has their own crematory that sits on site, that we don't let other people use. That's what makes us different. Do other funeral homes own their own crematories? They do. Do they sit on site? They don't. Do they let other funeral homes use it? They do. There's a crematory in Versailles. It's owned by 20 funeral homes. But 20 funeral homes are coming and going. I'm not saying anybody does anything wrong. There have been debacles across the country. I'm not aware of any in Kentucky. I'm not saying anybody does anything wrong. But then your loved one would be returned to you in a temporary basic urn. And the cost for that is $1,595. Call meal which occurs is between $3,000 and $3,800 for the same service. So does it pay to ask what it costs? It does. Let me share with you some of the other options when it comes to cremation, because cremation is obviously very prevalent today. When people talk about, I just described basic cremation. Here is something else that, again, I hate to take another kick at my profession, but it is what it is. Everybody is used to seeing us come to a church, right? When there's a funeral. Everybody's used to a funeral home being present. Why do you think that is?
And moving the body to move the body around.
Correct. The law says that if there's a body present, a licensed funeral director has to be present. If you are cremated, your death certificate, there's only 3 things you can do with somebody when they pass away. Bury them, entomb them above the ground, or cremate them. That's it. That's the only choices. So if you are going to be cremated and then bury your ashes in the cemetery, your death certificate says cremation. It doesn't say buried, because some people scatter. Some people do lots of different things with the cremains. So what the law says is a licensed funeral director has to be present if there's a body present. Once somebody's cremated in the state's eyes, it's no longer a body. So sometimes you will see when we help a family here at Good Shepherd, they're given an option. Do you want us there to coordinate the things that we've always done? Or do you not? Because we're not required by law and you don't have to pay for us. And I'm not trying to talk myself in or out of anything. It's just the way it is. Father Charles has had several funerals that we've taken care of that we bring them the urn, they handle the mass and everything else, and you don't need a funeral.
Little side note, remember the Catholic Church, it's allowed to be cremated, no problem. But scattering of the ashes is not allowed by the Catholic Church.
Well, any division, right? Can't divide the ashes at all, no matter what you do with them.
Things like that. And no, any division of the ashes is not allowed by the Catholic faith.
Do the remains have to be interred?
They may be interred in a sacred place, but it's not encouraged to have them up in the closet or on the mantle and things like
Right,
that.
but
They
I
should be
just
interred in
like-
a sacred place or placed in a niche or columbarium someplace.
Oh, yes.
And those can be blessed. Okay.
Okay? Yes, sir.
Another strictly financial question.
Yes, sir.
When you assign your policy, say, to the funeral home, and it's worth $30,000,
Yes, sir.
but the funeral only costs 15, where does the other go?
Back to you. Funeral home is only allowed to keep what the funeral costs that day. So we are required by law to itemize our prices out. We're required by law to present them to you, so you see what each item costs, and whatever the insurance is, we take out of that, and the insurance company gives the next of kin the extra money back.
So would it be is it the next of kin who's handling the affairs of the individual, or is it next of kin who is named on the policy?
Well,
Or does that?
if it's assigned to the funeral home, then we are the beneficiary.
Oh,
They're not anymore.
gotcha.
And we would be the owner, which they're not anymore. So then it would be, our question to the family is, who do we write the refund check to?
Or, I would imagine.
Or do we
some
split it
cases,
4
do we-
ways?
Exactly,
Yeah.
or do we just, I mean. I
Or
guess
do we-
If I were you, I would wanna know who I need to give in balance back to.
We need to,
Before I
yeah,
took possession
how do
of
I,
the
how
policy.
do?
It doesn't matter.
It does.
Just-
Because
Speak up.
when death takes place, it all changes.
Okay.
So unless you give it to the estate, that can be made a note.
Doing a really good presentation, but we have two more speakers. I know that we
Okay.
were supposed to allow about 15, 20 minutes for
Nobody told me
everybody.
that. You need to tell me that,
but I'm
because
just,
I can be
I'm
here
just,
for all day.
we're just gonna go ahead and do that. So if there's one more important question or one more thing that you want to say in closing, let's do that so we can get Sister up and then have Daryl, because I know Daryl likes to talk too.
Yeah, okay. Any other questions, real quick? Real quick, just from my perspective, back to cremation. I talked to you about basic cremation. One of the things that a lot of people don't know you can do it's becoming more prevalent, but it's what we call a traditional funeral followed by cremation. So some people want to have an open casket visitation or a closed casket visitation. They want the body there, they want the casket there, they want to have a funeral, but then they want to opt for cremation. That is anywhere from a half to 2/3 the cost of a traditional funeral. Why? Because the services are the same, but you don't have to buy a casket. We rent it to you. We think it's absolutely dumb to have you buy a casket and then cremate it. Makes no sense whatsoever. So we rent you the casket. You don't have to have a cemetery lot. You don't have to have a burial vault. You don't have to pay a cemetery $1,200 to $1,500 to close a grave. All those expenses are saved, but yet you had your traditional funeral. And so a lot of people, like, it doesn't matter if it's a Catholic church or the Baptist church, a lot of people like to have a church funeral. And then instead of going to the cemetery, we come across to Parish Hall, we have lunch, and then cremation takes place. Another option that you may not be aware of. Thank you all for having me out this morning.
Thank you, David.